Breakfast hosted by Vital Communities and Twin Pines Housing. It's a pleasure to meet so many familiar faces in person at last, and we're delighted to be joined by a virtual audience as well, thanks to the services of CATV. I want to start by thanking our sponsors, Mascoma Bank and Vermont Housing Finance Agency. They are generously supporting this event and helping us to address this critical issue that is facing our region. The current housing context in the Upper Valley is a story of mostly bad news, sprinkled with some uplifting good news. The bad news, as you know, is that we are in a long-standing affordability and availability crisis that has become significantly worse over the past few years. In New Hampshire, the median price for a home increased by almost 50% in just 3 years to $440,000. In Vermont, only 16% of households can afford the median price for a new home, the lowest proportion of any state population in the nation. As for renters, the average rent has increased to over $1,500 a month in Grafton County, 25% higher than the affordability limit for a family of 3 in this area. Simply put, our region's workforce cannot afford the cost of housing in the Upper Valley. In spite of this dire situation, the glimmer of hope is that stakeholders have never been more engaged in addressing the housing crisis here in the Upper Valley. Your attendance and the speakers we've assembled here are testament to that engagement. Today, we will most certainly hear more bad news, but we will also hear about the inspiring solutions and creative approaches being taken in the face of this profound challenge. Thank you for attending today's event and for all that you're doing. It's now my pleasure to introduce Clay Adams, the President and CEO of Mascoma Bank and the Chair of the Vital Communities Corporate Council. He'll be moderating today's program. Thanks, Clay.
Good morning, everyone. I echo Sarah's gratitude for your willingness to brave the pandemic and join us here today. And thank you for those as well who are joining us virtually. Moderating is a light lift for me today, and I also share Sarah's optimism. Her remarks were spot on. There was a study released this week by a survey by St. Anselm's College that suggested that now 69% of people state, my community needs more affordable housing to be built. And that's up 9 percentage points since last year. So it does feel like the tide is turning. There's greater awareness. This breakfast has been going on for many years, and we've been trying to raise awareness to the need for more housing of any type, particularly workforce housing. And I think what you'll hear today from our speakers is a perspective that things are really happening. And we have a long road ahead of us. But with that, I'm happy to introduce our first speaker. We will hold questions until the end, if you don't mind. And then we'll have several minutes at the end for that. So our first couple of speakers, Dave Duncan, who's the Vice President of Facilities Management, and Carolyn Isabel, the Director of Workforce Development and Planning, both of whom are employed by Dartmouth Health. And I think we'll hear a lot of things that they are doing to help with the housing situation for their employees, but also for other parts of the community. So thank you, Dave and Carolyn.
Carolyn and I are going to go back and forth on our presentation today, and thanks for coming. It is so good to see people in a big group, so welcome. I'm sure a majority of everybody knows Dartmouth Health, but why don't I just quickly, it's a system of hospitals and clinics and healthcare services across New Hampshire and Vermont. Working in our system is 13,000 employees. And you're going to hear about how many vacancies we have today, and one of our biggest challenges is housing. So let me just make sure this works. So, critical inventory shortages of apartments and houses. Everybody knows that. You know, the current inventory in the region varies between 98-99%. And affordability is a real challenge. The inventory that is available is not affordable for the majority of the positions vacant at Dartmouth Health. Affordable housing costs, which is rent, mortgage, interest, tax, and utilities, is typically defined as you can't use more than 30% of your income towards apartments or housing. So for an example, a $70,000 annual salary, and you take 30% of that, so you should be able to afford around $2,100 a month. If you make $50,000 a year, 30% of that is $1,500 a month. So the current available inventory in the Upper Valley, a little bit different than what you just said, because we're seeing it firsthand, is typically priced like $1,900 to $2,600 a month. And that's not including utilities. And utilities costs are in the range of $200 to $300 a month. So the math just isn't working.
Healthcare is unique in a way that it's one of the societal elements that we rely on and rarely think about until the day that we need care. And on the day that we need care, we assume that the hospitals, the doctor's offices, the visiting nurse and hospice services are going to be there with care providers available to help. One of the things that we face right now is the inability to bring care providers to our community who then can work in our facilities to care for the people in our communities. At Dartmouth Health, it had to happen once, right?
It will happen again.
At Dartmouth Health right now, we have about 1,900 open positions. And many of those, the majority in all reality, are in our clinical frontline care providing roles. We do have a small and shrinking regional talent pool, so being able to recruit directly into these roles is not possible, meaning that we need people to be able to relocate here to our communities to take jobs in our facilities. Demand for healthcare services continues to increase, which is driving us to add more facilities and services and to expand to try to meet that need. What we're seeing when it comes to housing is that candidates are accepting offers and then withdrawing that acceptance when they start to look around for housing. New hires are able to secure some affordable housing, but it's a minimum of 30 to 60 minutes away. And I think everyone has been watching the price of gas recently, and that commute is becoming less and less feasible. Housing and childcare cause unnecessary stress for people that are thinking about our area or considering this as a place to raise their family. We also, somewhat unique to healthcare, have a real need for short-term housing, as we do have a portion of our workforce is filled by traveling nurses, so people coming in for 3 to 6 month engagements, but needing to have space for them to come. And there are real kind of family impacts as well for the people living in our community, our workforce, when they can't secure housing, when they can't secure childcare, when they can't afford life on top of having their job. They're working multiple jobs and really trying to do everything they can to make ends meet. We wanted to walk through one really quick example, just to kind of highlight the costs that a family here in New Hampshire would be looking to kind of budget for. So the median family income in New Hampshire is just under $78,000 a year. So let's imagine a family of 4 with 1 school-aged child and 1 child in full-time daycare. So their monthly income after taxes is just about $5,375. If we factor housing costs at about 30% of that, it's $1,700. And then daycare, transportation, healthcare premiums, student loans, groceries and household supplies, all kind of factor into that bottom line, resulting in a disposable income of about $875 a month, or 16%. The reality is that securing housing for $1,700 a month is unlikely in the Upper Valley, and so as those costs increase, the disposable income decreases, and there's very little left for the extras, like clothes, car repairs, any kind of contingency funds, or retirement savings.
So how are we trying to help address workforce housing? What we did was we assessed our demand of our workforce, and we looked out 5 years. You know, how many people are we going to need to hire? You know, you heard that we have 1,900 vacancies. That doesn't happen right away, you know. We're trying to hire as many June grads of any clinical program, nursing, radiology, lab. So we evaluated that. We looked at our zip codes, and you know, we made an assessment of how many people we were going to be hiring. And then we began working with many developers in the region and in the Upper Valley, and we been identifying and securing and master leasing apartments. It's one of the tools we're using to recruit and incentivize people to come work at Dartmouth. We hired a dedicated housing program manager who's at the table, Jennifer. And I know that we all think we're busy at work. There's nobody as busy as Jennifer, and the amount of people that she's helping on a daily basis to try to find housing. On some of the apartments that we've secured, we've coordinated a shuttle bus back and forth from the apartments to bring our staff back and forth. And then on a routine basis, we meet with the staff that are in apartments or that have just started working here or been here a year and say, how's it going? What's it like? Tell me about the housing. Is it working? Is the apartment okay? What's the distance? How much are you spending on gas, etc.? And we use that to help figure out what we're going to need to use to incentivize people to come and work at Dartmouth. It's not on there.
It's not there?
so just-
Okay. So this is our last slide, what we think we need next. So as we think about our workforce in this region, really thinking about investment in housing that supports young professionals and families that are earning somewhere between $40,000 and $75,000 a year, and really focusing on adding to the supply. But not just supply of apartments, because there is a lot of development happening right now in that space, but we need houses for people to grow out of those apartments and move into so that they can really put down roots and stay in our communities. And then also being thoughtful about the placement of housing and what it means for public transportation and how people can get back and forth to places of work and to access the services they need. So really thinking with a community planning lens as we look towards future development. So we appreciate the work that is happening across so many different agencies and groups and the collaboration that is evident, especially when you come to an event like this today. But this is a macro problem that we are looking to try to solve together, and it's going to take every single one of us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave and Carolyn, for sharing that employer perspective. So I think you'll see from our speakers today that we're trying to represent a different perspective with each one. The next one is going to be Ken Braverman. Ken joins us, lives in Vermont, has done a lot of work in Chittenden County, but is increasingly doing projects down this way. We're very grateful for that. And Ken is going to share some information on what he's seeing as a developer here in the Upper Valley. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Clay. Great to see everyone this morning, especially in person. I think the best thing for me to do in terms of our time together this morning is for me to unpack some of the projects that are in our development pipeline. And I know that there's a pretty wide variety of people attending this breakfast. And I think we'll kind of hit upon some of the community development tools that we're utilizing in our various development projects. As you can see, we have a unique approach that really focuses on public-private partnership and workforce housing. Most of our projects are multifamily projects. And I'll talk about some projects in Chittenden County as well as some projects here in the Upper Valley. This is a project that we're advancing on Mount Support Road that many of you know about. It's a great site, as you can see, having just heard from Dartmouth Medical Center about their housing needs. The proximity of this site to both the hospital and to the employers in Centerra is just about perfect. It's directly across from the Michaels Student Housing Project, and most of our work focuses on smart growth development. And as you can see, the proximity to both employers and the services at Centerra are exceptional. The design, which was recently permitted at the municipal level, is for 4 buildings, each 51 units. So it'll be 204 unit project in a clustered design, which was deliberately executed that way to minimize site costs. Our goal is for this project to be a mixed income project and for our affordability targets to be 80% of the units at or below 60% of AMI. And I think some of the next presenters will probably get more into some of the affordable housing lingo. But that equates to affordable rents of about $1,000 to $1,500 per month, for $1,000 for a 1-bedroom, $1,500 for a 3-bedroom. So a wide variety of unit types at a rate that's approximately half of what the market rents currently are for up to 80% of the units. As mentioned, some of the key points: great infill site. There's existing bike ped connections, thanks to the City of Lebanon's planning and foresight on that. Targeting the growing need for workforce housing in this location we think is key. So the status is we're wrapping up our permitting and we're working with New Hampshire Housing to assemble funding sources to hopefully have a late summer start. Employer-supported housing, we're working with the University of Vermont Medical Center. This is a project in South Burlington that started in February. That picture was taken last week. So this week they're actually erecting steel, and next week they'll start to swing in the panelized wood frame construction. This will be a 4-story building built on a parking garage, all wood frame construction, 61 units with a $14.3 million budget. Similar to the Mount Support project, it's just a stone's throw from the UVM campus, about a 4-minute drive. Financing was provided by People's United Bank, and some key points here. The Vermonters in the room will kind of appreciate this project kind of checks a lot of the community development boxes in terms of tools that we've used. It's within a TIF district, it's within a new town center, it's a priority housing project. So a lot of the programs that the state of Vermont has put in place, we've taken advantage of and have found very useful. in terms of accelerating our permitting and ability to develop within the South Burlington City Center. Also noteworthy is University of Vermont invested $2.8 million into the development of this project, and they're obviously a key partner moving forward. Public-private partnerships is also something that we spend a lot of our effort and focus of our company. As many of you know, I've seen a lot of familiar Lebanon faces, from the mayor to city councilors and the city manager and planner. They've been exceptional to work with. This is a project that we're working on Spencer Street in downtown Lebanon. You know, we've hit a couple of snags on the brownfield remediation, but the city has been exceptional in addressing those issues, and they're not unusual for infill sites. I'm getting kind of waved on here, so I'll accelerate. Key points is city did an exceptional job with their downtown visioning. It really attracted us to the site and the future of downtown Lab, which we see as a huge opportunity for you know, really unmet demand for downtown living. Tax-exempt bond financing is another tool that we've been using to allow for mixed income housing. This is a project also in South Burlington, which we completed in February. It was essentially entirely leased before the building was complete, with no one ever stepping foot inside the building, which is just speaks to the level of demand. Again, 100% affordable, 60% of the units below, 100% of the units below 60% of AMI. Key points are, you know, inclusionary zoning, walkability, 3-bedroom units targeting families, walking distance to an elementary school and a middle school. Collaboration, key. You know, as you can see from our presentation, almost every project we work with has partnerships on everything. We're really excited to announce we're entering into a partnership with Twin Pines and Evernorth and DEW Construction for a project in White River Junction on the corner of Maple and Prospect. It'll be 42 units. It received funding last week for 9% low-income housing tax credits. And we're super excited about it. This is kind of a cartoon floating in air. You know, we're just starting the design process. The project will have 13 units at 50% of AMI, 17 at or below 60, and 12 market rate units. And as you can see, there's a wide variety of funding sources. Most notably for this conversation is this Upper Valley Workforce Housing Loan Fund, which Deb will get into. But we're excited to work with Twin Pines and Evernorth advancing that. Again, some of the same tools over and over again: infill, TIF, collaboration, and you know, partnerships. Kind of wrapping things up. Again, you know, creating, you know, these are some of the tools that we've used, and we encourage other developers to do the same to help kind of increase the production of housing. You know, strategic partnerships, whether it's regional employers or nonprofits, we find that as a useful tool. Engaging with local government and identifying underutilized sites, also key. Embracing density. Lots of planners in the room. Density in key infill sites, super important. And then, of course, you know, leveraging funding programs. And, you know, we love to compete. You know, we're business guys, so we like to compete. And we see an opportunity to really go, you know, there's a lot of funding resources, and the Upper Valley really needs to kind of focus and get targeted and work together to secure as many of those funding sources as possible for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I always say that development is not for the faint of heart, and I think Ken illustrates that with the need to be creative, to build partnerships, particularly for some of these brownfield projects where you never know what you're going to find. So thank you also to the city for working with Ken on some of these projects. Next, we're going to get the perspective from our state houses in Concord and Montpelier. I'm pleased to have Elisa Margolin join us, the Director of Housing Action New Hampshire, and also Chad Simmons, who's the Policy and Engagement Specialist with the Vermont Housing Finance Authority. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. I am not tall enough to stand behind these podiums, so I will just do it right from here. Thank you so much, Sarah and John and Ellen and Andrew and Clay, for hosting this important breakfast. I just thought that Ken's presentation was hopeful. You know, I mean, this is a pretty severe crisis we're going through. It really is impacting our communities, the future for our future families, our otherwise strong economy. And so, you know, to come together to see all of you taking the time, you know, to convene and talk about what we can do about this problem is hopeful. So I've been asked to give you the legislative update. I serve as Director of Housing Action New Hampshire, and we're your statewide affordable housing coalition in New Hampshire, and we work to improve state and federal policy so everyone in New Hampshire has a place to call home. And as we've heard the alarming data, we know and we've heard how important these tools are to these hopeful solutions. We know we have some work to do. This session, we focused on 3 priority areas. The first was a community toolbox bill, and Ken talked to you a lot about how important tools were. We came into this session off a number of wins for some prior years, and we saw growing political will to do something about the housing problem, bipartisan and bicameral consensus that we needed to do something. We had finally had a dedicated funding source for our affordable housing fund administered by New Hampshire Housing. We finally had a dedicated supportive housing Medicaid benefit and a new housing appeals board for more efficient and expert review. And all of those wins would not have been possible without many of the people in this room. I see Andrew's testified and Alan who's testified. And all of them, as Representative Almy knows, were all close votes, right? All of these were difficult, and they only happen when we engage. So the community toolbox was no different, and some might call its journey through the legislative process almost Shakespearean this session. It went through many duels. It died a couple of times and was resurrected and attached to new legislative vehicles. But I'm really pleased to report that in the end, we did come out with a bill. It had fewer tools than we wish that it did when we went into session, but we really did secure some really important wins in this bill. We have some density provisions. We have TIF financing enabling legislation. We have faster timeline requirements for planning and zoning boards. And we have requirements for findings of fact in writing. We have enhanced training opportunities for planning and zoning board members. So we do know that the governor intends to sign this. So good news. We'll be back next session to advance those ideas that didn't make it through this session in this toolbox, and we'll need your help in securing that win as well. The other priority this session was defending that prior win I mentioned, and that was the Housing Appeals Board. This is a really innovative model in New Hampshire, very low cost. It only costs about $400,000 a year to run this, and it will provide a more efficient review. So you have the appellant can go to the Housing Appeals Board instead of to Superior Court, and you can get your decision in 150 days. There were 3 bills challenging this session. And they're listed here. We were able to defeat all 3 of them. I will say that this is the 7th. We've had 7 bills challenging the Housing Appeals Board since its initial passage. We've been able to defeat all of them, but it just shows you that as our voices grow louder for affordable housing, our opponents are in play as well, and so we need to make sure that we continue to show up and secure those wins. Our other priority, and the last one I'll talk about before just mentioning a couple of other advocacy strategies we have, is we wanted to make sure that this unprecedented federal investment in our states was used for housing production, right? There was messaging coming out of this administration in New Hampshire that we wanted to use these dollars for one-time investments, that they didn't want to burden the general fund in the future. So we knew that housing was a really good fit. And I'm really pleased that Invest New Hampshire has been approved by Joint Fiscal, and thank very much Representative Almy for her yes vote that day, and by the Executive Council. And we expect for the capital portion of that program, the first round of applications to be announced maybe as early as the end of this month. You know, we felt like there was a need for more important guardrails, that these federal taxpayer dollars didn't go to luxury housing, and we were able to secure that, you know, through advocacy and through partnerships and through staying at the table. And we do intend to stay at the table as this big investment unfolds in our state, and every project must be approved by Executive Council, so that gives us a chance to say whether or not we think these dollars are going to good projects or not. And I think we can also celebrate, you know, Ken's drawings and floating cartoons. I mean, they're just so hopeful, and I want to be able to celebrate what we're doing right and how density can work, and we can preserve our rural character and the communities that we love and our beautiful outdoor spaces, but still provide affordable places for people to live. I do want to name that, you know, recently, and this is kind of got buried in the news cycle, that the Biden administration has announced in its housing supply action plan. We hosted a White House official at our recent stakeholder Zoom call to talk through a lot of really interesting proposals that can make a difference. In some cases, tying federal dollars to zoning, to community zoning, and so that there would be incentives for communities to compete for these resources. So we'll be continuing to watch that and to share news about that. And I also want to share that we did launch this session bipartisan and bicameral housing caucus in our legislature. And it is a chance to talk with members of many different committees and to build consensus. And that really did make a difference for us this session as well. My just reflections on the session itself was that I think there's consensus that there's a crisis, there's growing political will to do something about it. We continue to note the barriers at the local level. There's a recent poll from the Center of Ethics and Society from St. Anselm College that says that an unprecedented number of people acknowledge the affordable housing crisis and say that they need to do something in their community. When you ask them if they should do something in their neighborhood, that number goes down, right? So it's that whole backyard thing. But we do have more and more YIMBYs, and I think more and more communities are saying yes in my backyard, and we really want to celebrate those. And there is momentum, and so if we're the kind of issue du jour, and if we don't take advantage of this growing political will, it will be kind of a missed opportunity. So I really encourage all of you to stay engaged. So thanks very much for having me.
Thanks, Elisa. I'm Chad. I'm with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and this last session, kind of taking Carolyn and David's take that the math just doesn't work. And I'm taking also a little bit of Ken's vision of hope here. And that's what the legislature kind of brought in this session, I think. So to start with the punchline is this last year, we were faced with limited and aging housing supply, increased costs, in some places significant increased costs to development. the increase in a number of households, and this will be really important, I'll show this in just a minute. So while the number of people in the households may have decreased, the number of households increased. And that there was a significant, and continues to be a significant increase in housing prices. So to meet that challenge, the legislature and the administration put together a set of policies targeted at those challenges. And that looked at building housing where we need to and want to build housing using smart growth principles, making it easier to build housing in the state, and significantly using state and federal dollars to invest in housing rehab and housing construction. I'll also add, I think the legislature really prioritized equity and environmental justice and an eye towards climate resilience in these solutions. So again, to kind of look at where the legislature needed to focus its energy is looking at the construction really has failed to meet the demand in Vermont. And this is really, over the last 30 years, we really have not kept pace. And that has kind of improved within the last year or so during the pandemic with all the influx of resources. Looking at the low-income housing tax credit as the 9% as a barometer, you'll see that the price to build affordable housing has significantly increased. If you look at 2018, that price was a little over $285,000. And with the 2022 final applications that were just awarded, we're looking at a price of $270,000 per unit. So it's a significant cost increase. Vermont's housing aging stock, more than a quarter were built before 1940, so that just looks at the need for housing improvement of existing stock. The growth in long-term demand, so again, this is where we're finding that the number of households has increased. So the state was really looking pre-pandemic at a need for 5,800 homes just to keep pace with the rising demand. Home price growth, again, in Vermont, we've seen a 19%, and in some periods, a well over 20% increase in the price of median home price. Workers, and this is, Carolyn and David talked a lot about this. In Vermont, that we've seen a little over 9,000 fewer employees than we saw in 2019. And a good reason for this can be housing, childcare, and just the need, or the folks shifting careers. So how did we meet this challenge? So the legislature just wrapped up its biennium, and exhausting, as you can talk to the representatives and senator in the room, an exhausting 2 years to figure out how to meet these challenges. So I'll talk about a couple of approaches that the legislature took. First is the Housing Omnibus Bill, S-226. Senator Clarkson can speak to a lot of that heavy lift that our housing committees focused on. And so some of the things, as Elisa spoke to in New Hampshire, were some similar approaches and some similar tools that Vermont used. So really looking at neighborhood and downtown designations and expanding and improving those designations so it makes it easier to build housing in the places that we want to build housing. That includes priority housing projects and making it easier and a simplified process to build those housing. There was an emphasis on accessory dwelling units and ensuring that parking and accessory dwelling unit in construction was available and dollars were invested in those. Municipal and planning bylaw grants, there were significant investments, and I'll get to that in just a second in my 1 minute remaining that I've got. I'll also talk just real briefly about racial equity in housing for the first generation home buyer program that was initiated and land and property access board that was created. So a significant amount of time went into revamping our general assistance and emergency housing, and that's been an ongoing basis to figure out how we can ensure to get folks who are unhoused into permanent housing. And so that has been ongoing with the legislature, advocates, and the administration. The legislature expanded the Vermont Affordable Housing Tax Credit to increase the amount of dollars going into manufactured housing communities. The legislature also passed, which was a heavy lift, the rental health and safety to ensure that existing housing and communities have the infrastructure needed to make sure that safe housing exists. And also the legislature passed a monumental environmental justice bill, which will help communities figure out where resources need to go. So I'm not going to go through all this now, but hopefully we'll have some more time of Q&A. But I'll just highlight a couple of the major provisions that passed this legislative session. Significant dollars going into new construction of housing. The Vermont Housing Improvement Fund really invested a lot in our aging housing stock to ensure folks that are making sure that folks coming out of homelessness have safe, affordable houses to go. One of the more innovative programs that passed this last year is the Homeownership Development Program, also called the Missing Middle, which will infuse more dollars into the construction of new affordable homes. The last thing I'll say is some of the climate initiatives that were done this last year were really focused on the blending of electric vehicle supply for multi-unit family homes. So there's a lot of data on housingdata.org, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about some of the policies that passed this last session. So thank you.
Thank you, Chad and Alyssa. Our last speaker today is Deb Flannery, the Vice President of Lending for Evernorth. Deb's going to describe the Upper Valley Housing Fund, loan fund, which a number of employers in the region have been working on for over a year and a half now, and we're kind of going to learn some more details on it. So Deb, thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'm with Evernorth. I'm the lead staff person that's been working to set up the Upper Valley Loan Fund, and as Clay mentioned, a number of years ago, a group of these local employers started talking about this issue and trying to figure out how they could be part of the solution in solving this critical housing shortage for their workforce, both to address the needs of the community as a whole, but also to address the needs of their own companies. And so Evernorth was engaged because we have skills in the area of real estate development, specifically affordable housing, as well as housing finance, and could access additional resources to meet the needs. So I have the exciting privilege of announcing that we are partnering now with 8 different investors that either have provided firm commitments or have provided letters of interest and are in the final stages of approving commitments to fund housing, and we're targeting a $10 million fund. And I just want to call out these employers who have demonstrated such leadership in coming to the table with resources. And so I'm going to name them all, the 8 that we're working with now, and that includes the Hanover Co-op Food Stores, Mascoma Bank, thank you, Clay, King Arthur Baking, Dartmouth Health, Dartmouth College, Hypertherm, Citizens Bank, and Bar Harbor Bank and Trust. And I think they all deserve a ton of credit for the leadership, kind of really leading by example and saying we're coming to the table, we want to do something about this problem. So we started working on this, as Clay said, over a year and a half ago, really kind of diving in deeper to how we might engage employers in providing investments and into the housing system to increase the supply of housing for the workforce. And one of the first things we like to do is just say, who are we talking about serving here? And it's, in a nutshell, there's a lot of information on this slide, but it's those earning $15 to $25 per hour is who we're targeting with this fund. And then what are we hoping to accomplish in terms of affordability and bringing those rents down to levels that those households can afford? Really, again, a lot of information, but we're looking at $1,200 to $1,600 a month in rent that we would be charging as an affordable rent versus $1,500 to $2,200. So you can see a considerable savings there between what the market is producing versus what we're hoping to accomplish by using these employer dollars. There's a considerable amount of activity in the pipeline. We just wanted to call this out. This number changes probably daily, even in terms of what's contemplated, but currently there's over 1,000 units either under construction or in the permitting process. 70 of them right now that are in the process would be affordable. And currently, that would be adding to a supply of roughly 420 affordable units, units that are restricted so that they can't be, go up market, restricted for those households at the levels that we talked about in the earlier slide. So this is pretty significant in the sense that the takeaway here is just that the market is producing some housing, but there has not to date been a sufficient catalyst to make enough of those units available at affordable rates that can really meet the need and demand. And this is a lot of picture for just to say that what the structure that we're using for this fund is a revolving loan fund structure, and it's really to simplify matters, it's that investors are coming together and pooling their dollars. Each are making an individual loan to Evernorth, who in turn is going to invest those dollars in projects. And so some of the benefits to the investors here are that they're not trying to make decisions about which housing can be produced or is going to target get the right needs. They don't have to worry about assembling other complex subsidies and so on, but they can simply rely on the skills that Evernorth brings to the table to make those project selections. And then there's a repayment, just a guarantee from Evernorth to the investors on the project. So the loan, though, that project investments will be made directly by Evernorth. We are targeting a $10 million fund, and we have about half of it in firm commitments to date. And we are, like I said earlier, expecting to see the remainder come in here before the end of June. And we're hoping to close in July if all goes as planned. Very low interest rates. So investors are coming to the table with, I can't overstate how generous this is. It's a 1.5% interest rate they're charging Evernorth on the loan that they're making to fund projects. For 15 years. Those funds we anticipate deploying over the next 2 to 3 years, and Evernorth isn't charging a management fee, but we will likely charge some amount above that interest rate we pay to the investors to recoup some of our costs, but we will not charge more than 2% above where our cost of funds are. So that's going to keep the rates very low to the projects. And we'll also provide a security to the investors, so we'll pledge the underlying loan that we make to the project as collateral for the investors, as well as providing just a straight guarantee of payment and performance from Evernorth. So those are the terms that investors have negotiated. This is also a lot of information. Without a lot of time, I would just say that basically what we are anticipating is that we will provide equity-like mezzanine financing for projects that is long-term, 15 years, so that will match the term of our investor capital. And we will be making up for some amount of the equity that would otherwise need to come in if it was not a tax credit situation or some other, but also just bringing low-cost capital. So the interest rate on these loans will start at 2.5%. It'll be in a subordinate position to other financing, and so that's relative to other market products that could be accessed, a very affordable subsidy benefit to the projects. The production that we hope to accomplish with this is really, let's see, I think we have 243 more units that are going to be affordable, which is, I showed you the earlier slide, we had 400 and some, odd units already in the market that are restricted as affordable to these households. So this would represent a 58% increase over the supply that currently exists in this market. So really considerable if you think about it in those terms. And we will be dividing that up between different income brackets. So this pie chart, which maybe isn't that visible, shows that almost equal portions or similar amounts of the housing would be produced for the incomes at 80%, 60%, and 50% area median income. And then there's fewer than 10% of the units we expect to be unrestricted market rate, but that could be more or less. So that's sort of the production target that we have, assuming we could raise the full $10 million. And that's the end of my remarks, and I would just say that, the theme that I would want to emphasize here is that this is requiring partnerships. We are looking for ways to catalyze the development of new housing, and that can't be done by employers alone, and it can't be done by housing agencies alone, and it can't be done by government. It requires everyone to work together and to talk, and that's why these kinds of sessions are so important, to hear what folks are working on and connect with people. So it's about partnership. It's about really, this group of employers is outstanding in their way of thinking about it as a community benefit. They're not strictly coming in asking for housing to be built only for their employees. They're investing in housing for the whole community. So looking at it as community infrastructure and really banding together to make that possible for all of our members of the community. And then the other theme I would say is that it's a long game. I mean, we did not get into this overnight. We are not going to get out of it overnight. So stay engaged, be engaged, and continue to work on this. And this is just the beginning, and I hope it's hopeful for folks to know that things are happening, people are coming together, and we're going to work hard to make this problem go away. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Deb, and thank you for helping us break some new trail on this with the Housing Fund. We now have time for some questions, and we will entertain those. And while I look for a hand, I will just echo what Deb said, and that is that really a lot of us need to show up. I mean, that's a big part of it. Those who are very NIMBY about things, they're there already. We need to add our voices to that. So any questions? If I see you. Okay, Susan.
Thank you. Susan Elmy, Lebanon. I'm a little worried that we're looking mostly at the healthcare sector. Lebanon is also the center of a lot of high-tech manufacturing and high-tech startups, research, a variety of other services that go across the country as Dartmouth-Hitchcock goes across the region, northern New England. And Dartmouth Health, but Dartmouth-Hitchcock is falling behind seriously at this point in construction needs as versus just rental needs. They are clawing into the market that also serves the people in our retail, the people in our manufacturing hub, which is unique within the Northeast, I think, in being a mini Silicon Valley. And we permitted a 400-unit tower to staff a new tower that's almost finished in the hospital, and it's not going to be built for at least 4 years, they say. I heard about that 6 months ago. I haven't heard yet why. But I think that we really need to pay attention to the fact that we can't just grab rentals out of this, because we're grabbing them from other people, from other parts of our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I'll ask Dave Duncan if you want to share anything on that, Dave. And what?
It's on. It's a challenge. The hospital is an engine in the community, and we keep the community healthy. And we have to recruit people that can take care of our community. And it's just important that if we don't have the ability to make it housing for them, there won't be people here to be able to take care of us.
And I will add that Dartmouth-Hitchcock is an investor in the loan fund, which, as Deb said, is not earmarked for any employers. It's really for the general population. And they're also an investor, I know, in the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund to the tune of millions of dollars, which is very similar, not targeted at any specific employers. So I think it takes a lot of different tools to build this up, but Susan, your point is very well taken.
And one other thing, if you were talking about the new tower building that we're opening 64 new inpatient beds in a year from now. So that's well under construction, it's on budget, and it has the ability to grow to another 64 new beds, and that's to be able to serve the community.
Any other question? Right here, yes.
Joshua Durst from Norwich. I have some rental properties I've been renting to the new resident doctors. But you're opening a new tower that's going to be staffed by additional doctors and additional nurses. You are increasing the demand for housing. And to speak to the earlier point, your construction program is incomplete if you're not providing housing for the people who need to staff that new tower. How are you addressing that?
We're addressing that by working with developers like Ken and cities and working with them on the front end before they, as they're in their planning for their development. And I think it brings a positive to them when we say, yeah, you're going to build 200 apartments and we're really interested in 50 of them or 60 of them or 70 of them, because it just helps the project go forward, because before they're hitting the ground, they know that they're going to have 50 of them or 60 of them rented. So we're working with the developers, and when we do that, people like Ken go, and then this one can go well, then I have another one right behind that. So I think it's helping the developers continue to add inventory into the community.
Question in the back. We have time for one or two more.
Hi, my name is Heidi Reynolds. I live in Hanover. I'm curious as to what incentives there are. It's my supposition that it can't just be the large employers and Twin Pines Housing and other trusts that are going to do this work. What incentives are there out there for individual homeowners, landowners to subdivide and probably sell off land so more construction can happen of these homes rather than apartment dwelling units? And then also, what are we doing about, or is there anything in the pipeline about planning and zoning boards that are largely populated by, quite frankly, very wealthy people who like the status quo? There's a lot of resistance to, like you said, not in my backyard, it's all great, but don't do it here. So how are we going to address those issues for individual owners to open up the pipeline for us to develop our own properties, to allow for more housing, and to be able to afford to build more housing? We've got lots of land, it's just not being used.
Alyssa?
Questions. I will say that, so New Hampshire passed our accessory dwelling unit law. We were one of the first states in the country, so that says that you can have an ADU by right or by special exception, an attached ADU. Your municipality can go further and do detached ADU, so that's good news. The bad news is that there's been a bill for 2 years that died both times, but this time only by 11 votes in the House, but that would have allowed a fourplex by right, and that was introduced by Representative Ivy Van from Peterborough. And this idea of gentle density, like what can we do in our villages now, and if there's more popular support for that, that those ideas will fare better in the legislative process. And lastly, I'll say, I like your description of our current kind of those who serve on planning and zoning boards. Really not an easy task. Like, it's not an easy volunteer position. And instead of always looking at them as opponents, I do look at them often as people who think that they love their communities. They want to serve, and they they view themselves as stewards of the status quo. So I think so as we know, there's often a push to have people run for office when you get frustrated with those who are making decisions on your behalf. I think the same is true for Planning and Zoning Board. When it's time for you, when you have that time, to really to consider what it would be like to serve. And there is an effort underway through that organization I mentioned earlier, Center for Ethics and Society at St. Ansem, to recruit young people and millennials who have perhaps who have lived this frustration of their inability to access affordable rental housing and also an inability to access mortgages for homeownership, who have a vision of how they'd like to live in a dense village center, and starting to recruit them to serve on local planning and zoning boards.
Thank you, Alyssa. So we're going to wrap up. I apologize. We can't take more questions, but we're going to try to finish up on time. So Andrew Winter, Executive Director of Twin Pines, thank you for bringing it on home. Bye.
So I'll be really brief because I know we're at 9 o'clock right now. Thank you to our panelists. This was a really robust, interesting discussion. Lots of different good ideas, things that we're working on. Hopefully everybody here can take something away from what they heard today and take it home with them. And I encourage you to stay involved, write letters, show up at planning board meetings. Those are the kinds of things we all need to be doing. We need to be talking to our legislators. I'm looking at one of them right up here. Senator, thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for our legislative delegation, which has really advocated for funding for affordable housing in both Montpelier and Concord. We really couldn't do it without that. So thank you to everybody here. Let me also thank the staff, John, Ellen, David from Vital Communities and Twin Pines for putting this together. It's been great to see you all here. Finally, there is a survey. You'll be getting it via email. We'd love to hear what you thought of today's event, and we look forward to doing this again very soon. So thank you.